The global ocean has gone from infinite, wild, and thriving to finite, fragile, and full of garbage. We have a limited amount of time to get people to pay attention, to anticipate change, to prepare for surprise, and to act for a more sustainable ocean future. This is why the United Nations has introduced a decade of ocean science for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to strengthen the management of our ocean. But will it actually work? In today's episode, we will talk to Helen Ågren, Ambassador for the Oceans at the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Guillermo Ortuño Crespo, a researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, who is one of the leaders behind the UN Ocean Decade Early Career Ocean Professional Initiative. What impact do they think the Ocean Science Decade will have? Is it just a vision, or can it really change the face of ocean science and practice? My name is Andrew Merrie, and this is Rethink Talks. Welcome, Helen and Guillermo. It's wonderful to have both of you here today to talk about the UN Decade of Ocean Science. But I think before we start sort of cutting into the nitty-gritty and really digging down into what this means and why it matters, I just wanted to ask, each of you, and maybe starting with you, Helen, to share a little bit about why have you devoted yourself to the ocean? Why does it matter to you personally?
Thank you for inviting me, first of all. It's nice to be here. And why am I engaged in the ocean? I've been, ever since school, engaged in environmental issues in one way or the other. And I devoted my education to it and my career in public administration. So I've been working with different environmental issues like climate change, waste policies, and so on. And I got the opportunity actually to work with ocean issues when Sweden were hosting the first UN Ocean Conference in 2017. Mm-hmm. So then it was new to me, but now I'm hooked, so to say. It's a fantastic issue to work with.
Thank you. Guillermo?
For me, I guess it was a similar path as well. Since a very early age, I was hooked for some reason to the oceans. And I had a very supporting family in Spain who allowed me to leave at an early age and go pursue a professional education on it. And that's been pretty much what's dictated where I move around the world for the last 10 years. I started with a bachelor's degree in marine biology, pursued a master's in ecosystem-based management. I recently finished a PhD in the US on marine science and conservation. And through that process, I met some of the great people here at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, where I'm based now, doing my first postdoc. And the oceans, we are at a critical time for the oceans, not only in the context of climate change and food security. So it's a fascinating moment to be devoted to this career path.
So, and now we stand before the beginning of this UN Ocean Decade of science. And I sort of wanted to know, why now? And if you can give a little bit of background as to sort of how we've gotten to this place and why is now the right time for the Ocean Decade and where did this come from? And of course, the tagline of this is the science we need for the ocean we want. So as well as a bit of background, it'd be great to say a bit about what does that actually mean? So maybe Guillermo, you want to kick off this time?
Sure. So I'm not an expert on sort of global sustainability challenges, but my sense of it is that through the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, we've set ourselves some very ambitious goals for to be met by no later than 2030 across many topics. And one of them, Sustainable Development Goal 14, is focused on the oceans. And in order to turn the tide on a lot of these targets that we've set ourselves, we need to generate a lot more knowledge, but not any type of knowledge that is actionable and can be integrated into decision making. So the timeliness of the Ocean Decade is huge to meet these sustainability goals that we've set ourselves. So it's always important to generate knowledge, but in the context of sustainability, I think the Ocean Decade is our best last chance to generate knowledge towards sustainability action.
Yeah, and also in 2016, the first World Ocean Assessment was published, and it really pointed to the serious decline in ocean health and the many threats that the ocean faces, everything from overfishing to acidification, deoxygenation, and so on, pollution. And it's become very visible with the plastic pollution, which has also created more or contributed to more public awareness because it suddenly gets visible what's happening. That also has raised the issue on the political level, and it's a lot more political conversation now about how we can manage the ocean more sustainably. So, and then of course we need more science, both basic science about the chemical, physical processes of the ocean, the life in it, but also on innovations and how we can improve management and make use of the resources in a truly sustainable way.
And if I could just add, I think that your second question has to do with sort of the motto of the decade, which is the science we need for the ocean we want. I think we could spend several hours just on that question, because what is the ocean we want, and who agrees, who decides what it is that the direction that we're heading in, and it's something that we have to co-produce. And I think IUC UNESCO is doing a great job at kickstarting this decade by bringing all relevant voices on board to collectively decide what ocean we want in the future. And it's something that will vary across geographic regions and generations and sectors. And it's a very tricky conversation, but one that I think we have done a good job at starting these first 2 months of the ocean decade.
So it's really clear from both of your answers that there's a lot of different kinds of science that are going to need to be generated at the same time. And then they're going to need to be integrated and come to something which actually impacts outcomes. So, Helen, is politics even ready to receive this kind of science? What sort of structures are being built, or how is the science going to be taken into the process and actually be used? Because we all know as scientists, it's often extremely frustrating to continually generate new knowledge but feel like it falls into a black hole. Is there something different about the ocean decade and the opportunity to really, make the science have impact?
Yeah, I think the decade is actually an opportunity to build that bridge between science and policy, and also for that part increased awareness and also business development. So I think this is really an opportunity for us to improve science, but also to make better use of it. We have seen in the past years improvements in also bridging science to policy gaps by different global initiatives. For example, Norway and Palau has led the high-level panel on a sustainable ocean economy, and they have been working hard with, pulling together recent science and transforming it into policy recommendations. And we also see initiatives like Friends of Ocean Action, supported by the World Economic Forum, that are also working a lot with linking the science to policy and business development and improved sustainability in supply chains and so on. So I think we see a movement, and we need to seize this opportunity to strengthen that movement.
That's great to sort of bring up specific examples, but I mean, one thing, and this is, I know quite often the case with UN sort of initiatives, but it's completely unfunded and has a really broad mandate. What is actually then really realistic in terms of outcomes, and can it actually change the face of ocean science?
Well, I think, of course, there is not resources allocated for the decade right now internationally. Mm-hmm. But then again, if you look at, for example, if we take Sweden, the government presented in December a research bill. And in that bill, it's proposed to that Formas, the Research Council Formas, should develop a new 10-year national research program on ocean and water. So in the bill, it's suggested that the first 4 years, 210 million kronor are allocated to this program. So at national level, resources will be mobilized. And when we see increased political pressure, it will also gain more attention. So I think a lot of things will happen if we all engage.
I would just add that, I mean, you're absolutely right, Andrew, that it's a huge mandate. It's a global, decadal process, and it is unfunded. I do think that it will require some actors stepping up, and I'm really excited to see what Sweden does over the next 10 years in this context. But at the same time, I think one of the key components to make this a successful decade is the integration of multiple voices that are not heard, and that is, you can do that for free. And that if we look back from 2030 and we have accomplished that, bringing the global ocean community together, or at least given everyone the opportunity to express their opinion and give them a chance to integrate those thoughts and expertise into decision making, that will be a huge victory, and that doesn't require huge amounts of money. So I'm hopeful that some folks will step up, but again, a lot of great things can happen without a huge check in hand.
Yeah, and also the future of the ocean also depends on improved education and to improve ocean knowledge in the education system, and that's also something you can do with not too much. You have to change a bit the content of what you teach and so on. But there are a lot of supporting system existing with museums and aquariums and the universities and think tanks and all kinds of resources that we could draw upon.
Great. So speaking of resources we can draw on, Guillermo, you're actually co-leading the UN Ocean Decade Early Career Ocean Professional Initiative. So I'd really great to say a little bit more about what role do you see early career scientists having, and how do you really want to kind of step forward and take a leadership role? Because often, again, it's not always, sometimes young researchers have the best ideas, but they're not the ones with the loudest voices.
Right. And that is something that I think my generation of early career ocean professionals recognizes. And I think the decade, and I don't say this lightly, I think the decade will fail if we do not integrate the next generation of professionals into decision-making processes. We have some of the brightest ocean minds in my generation, but not only scientists, we're talking about anthropologists, we're talking about legal experts in the ocean context. And we are the fuel that will make sure that the decade runs and that persists after 2030. So for me, it's a no-brainer that we have to count on the next generation. We're not a box to check. We're not just young people who are also important and have to be integrated, but until you have professional training, it's fair enough that you're not sat around the table as an equal. You should be part of the conversation in other ways, like we see with some young activists. But it takes time to teach a natural scientist like myself how intergovernmental processes work, how industry operates, and how decision-making processes, the logic behind them. And so the sooner we can bring this next generation into the decade and other processes and sort of decision-making spaces, the more successful we'll be. Because if you have that sort of generational break, whenever it's time to pass on the baton, you will have to start learning from scratch. So something that I would encourage IOC UNESCO to continue doing, because they've done a good job so far, is bring in a diversity of perspectives, including young professionals who, yes, have a little bit of learning to do, but like you said, also bring some of the most innovative ideas to the conversation.
So one of the challenges, I think, that, is this, in some ways, kind of tension between the ocean as a sort of frontier of economic development and, the new opportunities for industries and so forth, while at the same time realizing that the state of the ocean is degrading really fast and that we need to take urgent and dramatic action to sort of, in many cases, restore or maintain the health of the oceans. So what does this mean in terms of like different states taking leadership roles? And can those that are sort of either directly or indirectly supportive of industries that are damaging the environment, can they actually take a leadership role? Like, how do we address those kind of tensions from a policy perspective over the course of the decade?
I think that's a $1 million question. It's the ocean is a very unique part of our planet from a governance standpoint. It's a highly connected system. And so you cannot afford to just do a good job domestically, your national territory, your national waters. But you have to engage with your neighbors. And sometimes in the context of marine pollution or climate change or migratory species, you may have to engage with actors across ocean basins. So your success depends on others as much as it depends on your own actions. So it's in a way it's humbling that unilateralism is not an option in this space.
Yeah, and when it comes to countries taking leadership and still doing businesses or engage in activities that are still harmful, that is, of course, that is possible. We see it already, and no person or no state is either good or evil or black or white. It's a continuous process that we need to get engaged in to come to handle the downsides of our activities and improve those, and to build on the good and positive things. So it's a continuous iterative process, and also a very important process where we need increased awareness and building political pressure and momentum. And you can have different methods with naming and shaming, or engaging in dialogue and so on. Eventually we will move further, but. Of course, it's a problem that we're in a hurry.
And sometimes it feels like if your fleet or your national citizens or companies do not occupy that space or go, catch that fish, someone else will do that. So it does take courage for politicians to forego some amount of domestic productivity, because it is, let's say you want to give up, let's say, benthic trawling in this part of the ocean because it's not sustainable when we've known for like 700 years. Well, another nation might go and do that same activity. So you're not, so it is a tricky situation. And like Helen was saying, we do need to build political consensus. And that's why the coalitions are so important.
Yeah. And sometimes also a change can come with only one person. So you shouldn't underestimate the power of individuals. We have seen Swedish leadership in global ocean affairs, and Isabella Lövin, our former deputy prime minister, and she has had different ministerial posts. She has been a leading figure, and that is also because Sweden has a long legacy of environmental and engagement and also for sustainable development. But individuals like Isabella, for example, has really raised the issue. And we see now as an opportunity with John Kerry being the presidential climate envoy. He has also a strong ocean engagement, and he initiated our ocean conferences to pull together ministers for foreign affairs and decision makers to engage in ocean improvement. So it's also a matter of seizing the moment when you have leaders in place with strong commitments and engagement.
Mm. Yeah, so in that sense, the UN Ocean Decade is very much primed for hopefully having a lot of impact and success, and of course it can help to drive a lot of the collective action and sort of build on things that are already happening, and I think that's really exciting. Helen, what do you want and need from science over the course of this decade? And then I would ask the opposite question to you, Guillermo. What do you want and need from policy?
Well, as we talked about in the beginning of the conversation, there are so many areas where we need more science. But what I think is important also to have scientific institutions and the universities to take the third mission really seriously. The third mission of the research communities is to communicate the results. So I think we need also to think about that, how to aggregate data and to synthesize the research to make it digestible for decision makers who don't have time actually to read all the scientific reports. So it's a crucial issue. So I think that in the decade, also some focus on communication skills and journalism, improved knowledge among journalists about the ocean is also a key.
I would say that if we want to develop actionable knowledge on the ocean, it requires generating knowledge over multiple years. The ocean is a space that we have to understand over a longer time frame, because there's multiple processes that act at interannual scale. So that is to say, long-term funding and some degree of stability as a researcher is fundamental, because we do invest a lot of time in writing grants for 6 months or 1 year or 18 months. And having that sort of peace of mind that we are funded for a longer time frame can really allow for us to go not only wide but also deep into a topic and really deliver the knowledge that is needed. And the other side of things related to what Helen was saying on communication, if you're not a scientist that is part of a big IGO or government delegation, some intergovernmental processes are fenced off to you. We rely on governments and some of the negotiating parties, let's say in the Southern Ocean, the high seas negotiations for a new treaty, to bring that knowledge into the conversation. We cannot just show up as, Guillermo from SRC and I'm an expert in high seas ecology and I'm here to. It doesn't work like that. So having strategic allies in governments that can help bring us into the conversation when we are required, not all the time. I think that doing that more often is great, because I feel like in some of these processes, whether it's high seas or the SDGs, some of the brightest minds on those topics are locked in academia and are not engaging with the decision makers as often. So, so bringing scientists and delegations when it's pertinent would be great.
Yeah, and we also see some interesting partnerships growing with sort of cooperation between scientists, civil society, governments, and businesses. So that is also important to keep that conversation and for researchers to engage in such initiatives to inform other type of decision makers.
And maybe that's a new role that perhaps the scientific community is now only just beginning to embrace. Like, how do we engage with, well, like you were saying, different types of decision makers that maybe 30 years ago in the traditional academic sense, it wasn't as often. But science is a tool that has to be used properly in the right context, and that context is not the academic bubble. We have to get out of our cocoons and take in a way a risk and say and prove that our science can be equally as robust, whether we engage with civil society or industry or governments.
Yeah, it takes courage, but it's an exciting opportunity. So one final question for both of you. No matter who this person is, whether they're a business leader, an entrepreneur, a high school student, a teacher, whoever they might be, if you had a very short period of time just to tell them why they should care about the Ocean Decade, why it should matter to them, and why they should engage in whatever way they can, no matter what their skills are or what capacities they have, what would you say to them? Why does this really matter, and why does it matter now?
This is like I said earlier, our last best chance to protect a system on which we depend on to the extent that we can't even imagine, for food security, for job security, for climate. And whether you are directly connected to the ocean or you have an interest or a passion and you have a different profession, we will look back at this decade and wish that we had been more committed and we had done more work. So if you think it doesn't affect you, think twice. If you think it doesn't affect your sector or the livelihood of your community, think twice. This is the time to learn. This is a whole decade of learning. We are all trying to learn something we don't know. So become engaged at whatever level you can. But this is the ocean is something we've been ignoring for far too long, and this is our chance to get it right. So reach out and learn, because probably your livelihood of your sector depends on a healthy ocean, and we're going the opposite way right now. So we have to do something about it.
Yeah, it's difficult to say anything more after that. I mean, it was so good summarized by you, Guillermo. But if I just could give you a suggestion, if you want to be motivated. So I could recommend everyone to see the film My Octopus Teacher, produced by Craig Foster. Every day for 1 year, he dives into the South African kelp forest without tubes and in freezing water to see the creatures living there in their own environment and to see the ecosystem and interdependencies of the different species. And he actually becomes friend, you could say, with an octopus and interacts with a wild octopus. So seeing that film, it teaches you a lot of things. First of all, that there are intelligent and fascinating creatures that know and have strategies far beyond what we have imagined, but also about the ecosystem and the sort of cycle of life, so to say. So it's a fascinating film, and it might inspire you to learn more and to engage in preserving what we have.
Thanks to both of you, and I look forward to the follow-up episode in 5 years when we're halfway through the UN Ocean Decade and we can report on our incredible success in both science and policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Rethink Talks, a podcast produced by the Stockholm Resilience Centre at Stockholm University. For more info, head over to our website at rethink.earth and don't forget to subscribe.